I'm a freelance graphic designer in my late 20s, living in a small studio apartment above my parents' garage in suburban Ohio. My parents are retired high school sweethearts who still love each other after 40 years of marriage. They're always cooking up a storm in their kitchen, making my favorite Italian dishes from scratch. My mom, a devoted fan of Trader Joe's, insists on buying all their artisanal cheeses and fresh pasta, which she then packages in Tupperware containers for our family meals. It was during one of these Sunday dinner gatherings that I met Emily, my childhood best friend who had just moved back to town after finishing college in Columbus. We bonded over our shared love of indie music and 80s movies, and I was excited to have her back in our little bubble. But what I didn't know then was that Emily's return would set off a chain reaction that would change everything. My dad, a retired mechanic, still tinkers with his prized 20-year-old Ford F-150 in the garage below my studio, and I often hear the sound of the engine roaring to life on weekends. It's a familiar comfort, but I've been noticing lately that he's been spending more time talking on the phone to someone named Rolf, a mysterious new friend who seems to be getting under his skin. I should have kept asking him about it. It started with a strange conversation my dad had on the phone the night before. I was cooking dinner in my studio apartment above their garage, listening to Bon Iver's For Emma on repeat, when I heard him arguing with someone named Ralph about a deal gone wrong. My dad's usually calm tone was raised, and I could sense his frustration. He muttered something about needing to take care of it ASAP, but I didn't think much of it. The next morning, while sipping my coffee from the Starbucks thermos my mom had brought home from the store down the street, I saw a new car in our driveway, a sleek, black 2018 Audi A4. It's not like any other car in our neighborhood. My dad had always been a Ford man, and this seemed out of character. I tried to brush it off as a weird coincidence, but my curiosity was piqued. As I continued to work on my freelance projects, I noticed that Emily seemed to be around more often. She would stop by the apartment above my parents' garage, saying she needed to borrow something, but always leaving without actually taking anything. My mom, a devoted fan of Target, insisted on buying all her household supplies from their store, and I remembered seeing Emily's name on the receipts from the past week. I started keeping a list of the times she came over and what she said she needed. But it wasn't until I saw her car, a 2015 Toyota Camry, parked in front of our house for hours that I started to feel uneasy. I had not changed it. The next day, while walking to the mailbox, I saw Emily's phone number listed on a notice from our local library. They were looking for someone to lead a graphic design workshop, and her name was at the top of the list. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized she might be trying to get close to me through my professional life. I decided to dig deeper and started making some phone calls. I talked to some of my other friends who had gone to high school with Emily, and they mentioned that she had been in some kind of trouble during her senior year. They didn't want to go into details, but it was clear that Emily had a history of getting into sticky situations. I made a note to look into this further when I got a chance. In the meantime, I noticed that my dad was being more secretive than usual. He would get phone calls from Ralph and immediately excuse himself to take them outside. I started to wonder if there was something going on between them that I didn't know about. I decided to do some public records searches to see if I could find out more about Emily's past. After hours of scrolling through government websites, I finally found a record of a lawsuit filed against her by one of her former employers. It seemed that she had been involved in some kind of embezzlement scheme and had gotten away with it. I stood frozen in front of the computer screen, scrolling through Emily's LinkedIn profile in slow motion. Her new job title read, Senior Graphic Designer, at a reputable firm in Columbus, the same city where I had a job offer waiting tabled. But it was her location history that made my heart skip a beat. She'd been visiting our company's headquarters every day for the past 2 weeks. As I scrolled through Emily's LinkedIn profile, my eyes landed on a photo of her standing in front of our company's headquarters. But it was the timestamp that made my heart sink. 10:45 a.m. on Monday, 2 weeks ago. The same day I had seen her car parked outside our building. And then it clicked, the Audi A4 in our driveway, the strange conversation my dad had with Rolf about a deal gone wrong, Emily's frequent visits to my parents' garage. They were all connected. My dad had been embezzling funds from the company and using our garage as a makeshift office. Emily was his partner in crime, using her new job at our competitor to gather intel and sabotage our business. I remembered the lawsuit record I had found. It wasn't just about embezzlement, but also about covering up a deeper scheme. My parents' kindness, their willingness to let Emily borrow things, made sense now. They were all in on it together. The phone calls from Ralph weren't about a business deal gone wrong, but about coordinating the scheme. And my dad's secretive behavior, he was trying to keep me out of it. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family and friends was a lie. I walked into our company's headquarters the next morning, determined to do what was right. I reported my suspicions to HR and the CEO, providing evidence of Emily's involvement in my dad's embezzlement scheme. We cooperated fully with the authorities, and an investigation was launched. My dad was arrested and charged with wire fraud and embezzlement. Emily was also charged with conspiracy to commit a crime. The judge handed down stiff sentences, including restitution for the affected parties and community service. As I watched them being led away in handcuffs, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, relief, and sadness that it had come to this. But most of all, I felt a sense of closure, knowing that justice had been served. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It was time to move forward, to focus on rebuilding our company's reputation and trust with our clients. I smiled, remembering my mom's words, "When life gives you lemons, make lemonade." It's been 2 weeks since the dust settled, and I'm still reeling from the aftermath of Emily's betrayal. The post got a lot of attention, and I've received some thoughtful comments and messages from friends and acquaintances who were also affected by the scandal. In fact, one of our company's major clients just reached out to confirm they're sticking with us, citing our transparency and commitment to doing what's right as key factors in their decision. Emily, on the other hand, has been cooperating with her lawyer, preparing for sentencing. I've been keeping busy myself, focusing on rebuilding our company's reputation and trust with our clients. My mom's words keep echoing in my mind: "When life gives you lemons, make lemonade." But it's hard to shake off the feeling that this is only the beginning of a long process of healing and recovery. I've been living in the same house in Napa Valley since I was a kid. My family's estate, Willowbrook Winery, has been there for generations. But it's all gone now. We lost it to foreclosure last year. The bank said they owned it, but my dad had other plans. He's been keeping secrets from me and everyone else for as long as I can remember. I found an old credit card statement in the attic with a charge at a Best Buy on Route 29, dated 3 years ago. My mom had no idea what it was for. It was like he'd bought a new computer or something. She said she never wanted to know. The bank called me last week to tell me they were selling the property at auction. But then they dropped a bombshell: the documents proving we owed the money were forged. My dad's been hiding assets and faking records for decades. I still live in the house. By the way, it's still mine until the bank figures out what to do with me. I've been going through my dad's old office, trying to find any clues about what really happened. I found a bunch of encrypted files on his computer, but I couldn't crack the code. I think I'm starting to get a headache. I was going through the mail on Tuesday afternoon, sorting bills from the kitchen counter to the mailroom table, when I saw a utility bill from Pacific Gas and Electric, addressed to me at Willowbrook Winery. I'm positive I never signed up for electricity service in my name. The meter reading was current, though someone must have paid the last bill. I opened the bill and noticed that the payment method listed was an American Express card, with a number I didn't recognize. The address on the statement was my mom's maiden name, which she never used after her divorce from my dad. The due date for the next payment was 2 weeks away, on the 15th of April, a Tuesday at 5 p.m. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared at the bill. Someone had set up this service under my name without me knowing. I've been going through my dad's old office, trying to find any clues about what really happened. I found a bunch of encrypted files on his computer, but I couldn't crack the code. I think I'm starting to get a headache. I started keeping a list of all the things that didn't add up. I added the date my mom got the divorce papers and the year my dad retired from Willowbrook Winery. I noted the strange phone calls she's been receiving since January. The ones where she just hangs up without saying anything. I checked the security footage on our home system, and I saw a figure in a black hoodie walking around the property on the night of the 27th. I couldn't make out their face, but it was definitely someone who didn't belong here. I increased the camera's zoom for that night, and I managed to capture a partial license plate number on one of the cars parked near the entrance. It was an old Toyota Corolla, from what I could tell. I looked up the registration for all the Corollas in the area and found a match: a 2007 model. It's registered to a company called Napa Valley Landscaping. I made a note to look into their background and see if they have any employees with a history of forgery. On Tuesday afternoons, I went through the mail and found another utility bill from Pacific Gas and Electric, addressed to me at Willowbrook Winery. The meter reading was current, though someone must have paid the last bill. I opened the bill and noticed that the payment method listed was an American Express card, with a number I didn't recognize. The address on the statement was my mom's maiden name, which she never used after her divorce from my dad. The due date for the next payment was 2 weeks away, on the 15th of April, a Tuesday at 5 p.m. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared at the bill. Someone had set up this service under my name without me knowing. I started making phone calls to the electric company and American Express, trying to get more information about these payments. I opened the encrypted files on my dad's computer. The first one was labeled Willowbrook 2001 and contained a single document with a timestamp: 10:47 p.m., April 15th, the exact date listed on the Pacific Gas and Electric bill. As I stared at the encrypted file labeled Willowbrook 2001, I felt a chill run down my spine. I opened it, and the timestamp on the document inside matched the exact date listed on the Pacific Gas and Electric bill: April 15th, 2001, at 10:47 p.m. My mind racing, I scrolled through the document, and my eyes landed on a single sentence. transferred ownership of Willowbrook Winery to Napa Valley Landscaping effective immediately. It was a transfer of ownership, signed by my father, but the strange part was the date. It matched the exact date listed on the Pacific gas and electric bill. I realized that the electricity service was set up under my name as a ruse, a way for my father to keep tabs on the property without arousing suspicion. The payments were just a small part of his larger scheme to keep Willowbrook Winery in our family's hands, even after it had been foreclosed. The list of suspicious transactions I'd compiled in my head started making sense now. The encrypted files, the strange phone calls, the figure in black on the security footage. It was all connected, and it all pointed back to my father's desperation to hold on to our family's legacy. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me as I realized that my father's actions had been driven by a desire to protect us, but also by a refusal to let go. The truth was both heartbreaking and infuriating. He'd hidden this from us, even when we needed the truth most. I walked into the sheriff's office, accompanied by my mom and a lawyer. The detective handed me a folder with the case files on Napa Valley Landscaping, and I saw that they had been charging my dad with forgery and embezzlement. He'd been using the company to funnel money from Willowbrook Winery's assets into his own accounts. My heart was racing as I read through the documents, seeing all the ways he'd manipulated the system. The detective explained that they had enough evidence to bring him in for questioning. My mom took a deep breath and held my hand as we walked out of the office, knowing that justice was finally being served. As we drove away from the station, I looked at her and said, "It's over. We can rebuild now." She smiled and put her arm around me, saying, "We will, sweetie. We'll start fresh." The weight of years of secrets and lies finally lifted off our shoulders, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me as we pulled into the driveway of our new home, one that wasn't tainted by my dad's deceit. I'm Emily, a 32-year-old marketing specialist who's been married to my husband Ryan for 3 years. We got married at a small vineyard in Tuscany with 75 guests, but during the reception, a guest revealed that I was actually married 6 years ago to a man serving life in prison for arson. I'm still trying to process how I managed to keep this secret from everyone, including my family. Ryan and I had just finished our honeymoon at the Four Seasons in Bali when he started asking me questions about my past, but I brushed it off as him being jealous of my old life. He's a great guy, and we were happy together, but now I'm starting to wonder if he knows more than he's letting on. I still drive my 2015 Honda Civic, which has a cracked back windshield from a rock chip incident on I-85. I work out at Planet Fitness 3 times a week, and Ryan usually joins me on Tuesdays and Thursdays. My best friend, Sarah, is a wedding planner who helped us with our big day. She's always telling me how organized and put together I am, but deep down I'm a mess. I've been having these recurring nightmares about being trapped in a burning building, which is probably just a side effect of my past coming back to haunt me. I keep thinking that it's all going to come crashing down soon, but for now, I'm trying to stay calm and focus on our upcoming anniversary party. I was getting ready for our weekly workout at Planet Fitness on Tuesday morning when I noticed my husband Ryan acting strange. He usually helps me with the free weights, but today he was lingering near the treadmills, eyeing the cardio machines with an intensity that made me raise an eyebrow. As I began my set of squats, he casually mentioned that he was thinking of trying out a new fitness program at his office gym downtown, specifically one that focused on functional training, with an instructor named Coach James from 6:00 to 7:30 p.m. on Thursdays. That's the same time we usually go to Planet Fitness together, and the same hour Ryan often asks me to grab coffee at the Starbucks nearby. Now, I'm not sure if this is just my paranoia, but the way he mentioned Coach James seemed too coincidental, like he was trying to drop a hint about something. I tried to brush off Ryan's behavior as him being jealous of my old life, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt like he was hiding something from me. I started keeping a list of all the strange occurrences that had been happening lately. I wrote down every time Ryan mentioned his work or his colleagues, and every time he seemed nervous or evasive. I also jotted down the name of Coach James, the instructor he mentioned on Tuesday. As I was driving to work on Wednesday morning, I noticed a black SUV following me. I couldn't get a good look at the license plates, but it seemed to be lurking in my rearview mirror all day. I tried to shake it off as paranoia, but when I got home and saw Ryan's car parked in our driveway, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I decided to do some research on Coach James, and what I found was disturbing. There was no instructor by that name at Ryan's company, and no record of anyone with that name working as a fitness coach in the area. I also discovered that Ryan's wife, Sarah, had a similar name to my best friend Sarah, the wedding planner. I started to feel like I was living in a nightmare. Every time I turned around, there was another piece of evidence pointing to Ryan's deception. I remembered a conversation we had a few months ago, where he mentioned that his brother had gotten into some trouble with the law. But when I asked him about it again, he brushed it off and said it was just a family joke. I decided to investigate further and started making some phone calls to Ryan's colleagues. One of them mentioned that Ryan had been acting strangely around the office for the past few weeks, and that he seemed to be getting more and more agitated as the days went by. I also discovered that Ryan's credit card statements showed a suspicious transaction on the day we got married. A large sum of money was deposited into his account from an unknown source. I stumbled upon Ryan's old phone, buried beneath the couch cushions. The screen was cracked, but the wallpaper still displayed our honeymoon photos from Bali. I scrolled through his contacts and saw a name I didn't recognize. Emily 2008. Suddenly, my heart sank. My eyes were fixed on a single text message. I'll never let you go again. The text message? I'll never let you go again? Sent a chill down my spine as I stared at the cracked screen of Ryan's old phone. My heart sank, and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I remembered now. The suspicious transaction on our wedding day was actually Ryan's payment to a private investigator who had been tracking me since 2008. I stumbled upon the PI's records, and what I found was devastating. I was married to a man serving life in prison for arson 6 years ago, because I was already engaged to Ryan at the time. My old husband, Alex, had been a suspect in a string of fires that had burned down several buildings in the city. He was acquitted, but the public pressure and media attention drove him to arson again. The fire that destroyed his own apartment was the one that landed him in prison. As I scrolled through the records, I saw that Ryan had been keeping tabs on me, monitoring my every move, from the Four Seasons Hotel where we honeymooned to the Planet Fitness where we worked out together. He knew everything about me, including my recurring nightmares about being trapped in a burning building. The Coach James reference was actually his code name for the PI who was tracking me. The black SUV that followed me on Wednesday was Ryan's way of keeping an eye on me, making sure I didn't stumble upon the truth. The name, Emily 2000A, on his phone was not a coincidence. It was my old alias from the investigation. I felt like I'd been living in a nightmare, and now I knew why. I stood outside the courthouse, watching as Ryan was led away in handcuffs, charged with stalking and harassment. I remembered the black SUV following me, the suspicious transaction on our wedding day, the Coach James reference that was actually his code name for the PI who was tracking me. It all made sense now. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a sense of closure. The nightmare was finally over. I took a deep breath and thought back to the vineyard in Tuscany where we got married. I recalled the beautiful scenery, the love we shared, and the joy of that day. It was all a facade. A carefully constructed illusion designed to keep me trapped. But now I was free. I looked up at the sky and felt a sense of peace wash over me as the sun began to set on that chapter of my life. I realized that I had been given a second chance, an opportunity to start anew and leave the past behind. With that thought, I took a step forward, leaving the courthouse and its memories behind me. 2 weeks later, I've been flooded with messages and comments from people who've been following my story. I'm still trying to process everything that's happened, but I wanted to share an update on the court proceedings. Ryan's trial is set for next month, and I'll be testifying as a key witness. I also recently received a letter from my family's lawyer, letting me know that my husband, to-be's family has agreed to cover all of the expenses related to the wedding and honeymoon, since it was all a ruse to keep me in line. As for me, I've started taking cooking classes at night, something I've always wanted to do but never had the time for. It's funny how life works out amidst all this chaos. I'm finding solace in the simple things. I've been living in my childhood home in suburban Oakwood for 5 years, ever since I graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in business administration. My husband, Alex, and I paid off his '03 Silverado in 2018 and have been saving for a down payment on our dream house. We have a routine every Wednesday evening. We order pizza from Domino's at 6:45 p.m. and watch TV together until 10:00 p.m. On Fridays, I go grocery shopping at Major at 5:30 p.m., and we cook dinner together as a team. The day before yesterday, I stumbled upon an old trunk in the attic while looking for some holiday decorations. It was padlocked. But I have a feeling it's been locked away for decades. I've always wondered what secrets my late aunt, Karen, left behind. As I picked up the trunk, the metal creaked slightly, as if it had been disturbed recently. I should have asked my husband to help me before trying to open it. As I opened the trunk, a faint scent of lavender wafted out, transporting me back to my childhood. But it was what lay on top of the dusty clothes and old photographs that caught my attention. A brand new, still unwrapped iPhone 11 Pro, nestled between 2 stacks of Polaroids. My heart skipped a beat as I realized this was no accident. The phone had never been used, and the camera roll was blank. I flipped through the photos, and one in particular made me freeze. It was a picture of me taken at my college graduation, but my Aunt Karen had scribbled on the back in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Meet me at the coffee shop at 7:00 a.m. tomorrow. K. The date stamped on the corner read December 17, 2008, exactly 1 week before my graduation. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I wondered what my aunt had been planning that day, and why she'd kept it a secret from me. I stared at the Polaroid of my college graduation, my aunt's handwriting scrawled on the back. Who was Kay? Was it a typo, or did she have someone else in mind? I wondered what would have happened if I'd met her that morning. I went through the rest of the trunk, searching for more clues. Among the old clothes and photographs, I found a major receipt from 2008, dated December 18th, the day after my graduation. The item listed was a pack of lavender-scented candles. My aunt had a fondness for lavender. It reminded her of our childhood summers spent in the garden. But what caught my attention was the timestamp 9:45 p.m. It was an unusual hour for a purchase, and the item was not something you'd typically buy on impulse. I tucked the receipt into my pocket, adding another item to my growing list of questions. Next, I turned my attention to the iPhone 11 Pro. Who could have left it here? And why? I plugged it into my computer, but there were no contacts, no messages, nothing to suggest it had ever been used. Yet, the camera roll was filled with blank photos as if someone had taken the time to delete all the images. A chill ran down my spine. I felt like I was uncovering a secret that wasn't meant for me. As I continued to dig through the trunk, I stumbled upon an old calendar from 2008. The days leading up to my graduation were highlighted in yellow, but one entry stood out: December 17th, with a scribbled note that read, "Meet me at the coffee shop." The handwriting matched the one on the Polaroid. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. I remembered my aunt telling me about her friend Kay, a woman she'd met through a writing group. I had always thought it was just a casual friendship, but now I wondered if there was more to it. I started keeping a list of all the inconsistencies I'd found so far: the iPhone, the Polaroid, the receipt, and now this calendar entry. Each new discovery left me with more questions than answers. As I sat amidst the dusty memories, I couldn't shake the feeling that my aunt's life was more complicated than I'd ever imagined. The thought sent a shiver down my spine and made me realize that I had to keep digging. I stared at the Polaroids. My aunt's handwriting scrawled on the back, as I suddenly realized every single photo in this cache was taken in black and white. Except for mine, it was in vibrant color, like a Polaroid had been superimposed onto a different image. The iPhone 11 Pro, still unwrapped and blank, had been a red herring all along. I stared at the Polaroid of my college graduation. My aunt's handwriting scrawled on the back. Suddenly, the date and time on the receipt from 2008 to 9:45 p.m. made sense. My aunt hadn't been buying candles, she'd been meeting someone. The lavender scent wafting from the trunk wasn't just a memory, it was a signal. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the truth. The Polaroid of me, taken at my graduation, had been superimposed onto an image of someone else's party, but not just any party. It was the same image that had been on the front page of the Ann Arbor News on December 17, 2008, the one where I'd walked off the stage with my diploma. My Aunt Karen hadn't been planning to meet me. She'd been meeting someone else, the woman in the photo, who looked eerily like me. The phone, the camera roll, the blank photos, all of it was a setup. A setup to keep me from finding out that I wasn't the one in the photos, but someone else entirely. Someone who had been living in this house, under my roof. I plugged the iPhone into my computer and scrolled through the deleted photos, but they were all blank except for one. A Polaroid of me, taken at my college graduation, with a handwritten note on the back. Meet me at the coffee shop at 7:00 a.m. tomorrow. K. The date stamped on the corner read December 17, 2008, exactly 1 week before my graduation. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the truth. The person in the photo wasn't me, but someone who looked eerily like me. I remembered the receipt from Mijer, dated December 18, 2008, and the unusual timestamp of 9:45 p.m. It all clicked into place. My Aunt Karen hadn't been planning to meet me, but the woman in the photo, who had been living in this house under my roof for years. I called the police, and they took a statement from me. They found evidence of identity theft and harassment on the iPhone, and charged my aunt's friend with impersonating someone and violating a restraining order. I'm a writer, and my latest book is doing surprisingly well. It's even been picked up by a major publisher, which is why I've been getting so many emails from fans and reporters. My old boss at the marketing firm where I worked for 5 years is one of them. His name is Gary, and he used to breathe down my neck about meeting sales targets, always questioning my strategy and suggesting I was being too soft on our clients. Now he's trying to spin our success into some kind of personal triumph, claiming that he was the one who really made the book a hit. My wife, Rachel, is amused by this. She knows how Gary used to treat me when we worked together. We met in a coffee shop near the office, and now we have a toddler together. I see him on social media, posting about how he's leveraging his connections in the industry to promote our book. He mentioned something about a strong narrative thread that runs through the whole thing, which I know is just code for. I had nothing to do with it. Anyway, Gary's messages are starting to get a little too persistent, so I should probably respond and set him straight, or maybe not. I was browsing my email on Wednesday evening, sipping a coffee from the Starbucks cup I got from the drive-thru that morning, when I saw Gary's name pop up in my inbox for the 3rd time that week. His messages were getting more frequent and his tone more congratulatory. He sent me a link to an article about our book's success on the marketing blog of the 24-hour diner where I used to grab breakfast with my team every Friday morning. The article claimed that Gary had crafted a winning strategy for the book, which included using social media to build a community around the narrative thread. I didn't remember him being involved in any social media planning during my time at the firm. I called Rachel from my iPhone, which was a 2015 iPhone 6 with a cracked screen, and showed her the article. She raised an eyebrow and said, "This is getting interesting." I started going through Gary's messages again, and this time I paid closer attention to the language he used. He kept mentioning "or team" and the narrative thread, but I knew it was just a bunch of corporate jargon. Made it a note to look into the marketing blog article more closely, but first, I had to get my son Jack down for his nap. Rachel and I were trying to get him on a schedule, and he was being particularly stubborn today. As I rocked him in the living room, I thought about calling Gary back and asking him some pointed questions, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way he phrased things, always emphasizing how much he had done for our success. When Jack finally fell asleep, I went back to my emails and started searching for more information on the marketing blog article. The writer's name was Emily Wilson, and she worked for a firm called Brand Boost. I Googled them and found their website, which was full of testimonials from satisfied clients. I scrolled through the list, but none of the names looked familiar. I made a note to check with my old colleagues at the marketing firm to see if anyone remembered working with Emily or Brand Boost. As I continued to dig, I started to feel a creeping sense of unease. It was like Gary was hiding something, and I wasn't sure what it was. I decided to look into the article's claims more closely. According to Emily, Gary had been instrumental in creating the narrative thread that ran through our books. He mentioned something about using social media to build a community around the story, but when I looked at our book's social media accounts, I saw no evidence of Gary's involvement. I started to wonder if he was trying to take credit for my work. My wife, Rachel, poked her head into the room and asked what I was doing. I showed her the article and explained how it was making me feel uneasy. She raised an eyebrow and said, "You're not going to let him get away with this, are you?" I shook my head, but inside, I was already thinking of ways to confront Gary. I started keeping a list of all the strange occurrences, including Gary's messages, the marketing blog article, and my own suspicions about his involvement. As I wrote, I started to notice a pattern every time something weird happened. It seemed to be connected to Gary in some way. I made a note to look into his background, see if he had any connections to the marketing firm or Brand Boost. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something was off about this whole thing. I dug into the marketing firm's old database and found Gary's login records. Every single day he had accessed my old project files, including the ones I deleted years ago. But what really caught my attention was the timestamp on his last login, exactly 1 week before our book hit the bestseller list. I couldn't believe it when I finally dug up the login records for Gary's old account. He had accessed my project files every single day, including the ones I deleted years ago. But what really caught my attention was the timestamp on his last login, exactly 1 week before our book hit the bestseller lists. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that Gary had been using my old work to leverage his own connections in the industry. The article about our book's success, the marketing blog post, it was all just a clever ruse to make himself look good. I remembered the way Gary used to breathe down my neck about meeting sales targets and how he'd always been critical of my strategy. It made sense now. He was trying to take credit for my work and using his connections to promote our book as his own. The narrative thread he mentioned in the article was just a euphemism for my own writing. I felt a wave of anger wash over me. But it quickly gave way to sadness as I realized how desperate Gary must have been to cling to relevance in our industry. I recalled the way he'd sent me messages, congratulating me on our success and emphasizing his own role in making it happen. It was all just a carefully crafted illusion, designed to make him look good and take credit for my work. I decided to take action and sent an email to the publisher, detailing Gary's suspicious behavior and the evidence I had uncovered. Within days, the publisher launched an internal investigation, and Gary was suspended from his position. The marketing firm where he worked also conducted an inquiry, and it was determined that Gary had indeed accessed my old project files without permission. He was let go from his job and faced a civil lawsuit for breach of contract and intellectual property theft. As I watched the consequences unfold, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I realized that my book's success had been mine all along, and that Gary's attempts to take credit for it had ultimately led to his downfall. The experience taught me the importance of protecting one's work and standing up for oneself in the face of adversity. 2 weeks later, I'm still reeling from the aftermath of my book's success and Gary's downfall. The post got a lot of attention, with many of you sharing your own stories of workplace betrayal. I've been fielding congratulations and messages of support nonstop, and it's surreal to think that what started as a personal vendetta has become a rallying cry for so many others. I just received word that the civil lawsuit against Gary has been scheduled for trial in 6 weeks' time. His lawyer is pushing for a settlement, but I'm determined to see this through to its conclusion. In other news, I've decided to donate a portion of my book's proceeds to a local writers' organization, which will provide resources and support to emerging writers. As I look back on the past few months, I'm reminded that success can be a double-edged sword. While it's been incredible to have my work validated, I've also had to confront some dark corners of my own psyche. I'm slowly learning to separate my worth from the validation of others and to trust in my own abilities. It's a hard-won lesson, but one that I'm grateful for. I grew up in the suburbs of Los Angeles, where my family's home was constantly under renovation. My father and his crew would work tirelessly for months at a time, replacing drywall, installing new flooring, and repainting every room. I was around 10 years old when I first started noticing that my father's crew was working on some unusual projects. They would bring in strange materials like reinforced steel beams and high-tech security systems and install them behind locked doors. One of our neighbors, a retired police officer named Mark, would sometimes stop by to chat with my dad. I overheard snippets of their conversations, but they always seemed to be code for something else. My father would glance at his watch and say something like, "Sorry, Mark, we're on a deadline," and Mark would nod and walk away. I tried to ask my mom about it, but she just smiled and said, "Don't worry about it." Sweetie? I was always curious, but I had more pressing concerns, like getting through middle school without too much drama. Looking back, I wish I'd paid closer attention. But I guess that's not until you realize what you're being kept from. I remember the day I stumbled upon a blueprint for our house's addition. It was a Friday afternoon, and my dad was working with his crew to install new cabinets in the kitchen. I had been tasked with making dinner, and as I waited for the chicken to cook, I wandered into the garage to grab some spices from the shelf. That's when I saw it, a large-scale blueprint of our house's floor plan, with several rooms highlighted in yellow. I recognized the rooms as being behind the locked doors that my dad's crew had installed during the renovation. The blueprints had our address and the date stamped on them. 14/10/2015, 9:45 a.m., Los Angeles, CA. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this was no ordinary renovation project. I tried to casually mention it to my dad, but he just smiled and said, "Oh, that's just some extra work for the electrician, don't worry about it." But I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a much larger puzzle. I started paying closer attention to the renovation projects around our house. The crew would often take breaks to chat with Mark, the retired police officer next door. I'd overhear snippets of their conversations, but they always seemed hushed and urgent. My dad would glance at his watch and say something like, "Sorry, Mark, we're on a deadline," and Mark would nod and walk away. I noticed that the crew was working on some unusual projects. They'd bring in strange materials, like reinforced steel beams and high-tech security systems, and install them behind locked doors. I saw them hauling in crates of wires and circuit boards, which they'd connect to the house's electrical grid. I saw my dad arguing with one of the contractors over a design change. He seemed genuinely upset. I started keeping a list of all the strange things I noticed. I jotted down details like the date and time of each occurrence, along with any relevant descriptions or observations. I kept the list hidden in a notebook under my bed. One day, while rummaging through the garage, I stumbled upon an old blueprint for our house's addition. It was dated 1985, and it showed several rooms highlighted in yellow. I recognized those rooms as being behind the locked doors that my dad's crew had installed during the renovation. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this was no ordinary renovation project. I decided to dig deeper. I started researching local contractors and their work on similar projects. I came across an article about a contractor who'd been involved in a high-profile scandal involving a notorious crime boss from the 80s. The contractor's name was listed as John in the article, but I couldn't find any information on him working with my dad. I decided to pay Mark a visit, hoping he might be willing to talk about his involvement with my dad's crew. When I arrived at his house, he seemed nervous and fidgety. He told me that he was just a concerned neighbor trying to help out, but I sensed that there was more to it. As I continued to investigate, I started noticing strange inconsistencies in the renovation work. I saw that some of the electrical wiring had been rerouted, and the security cameras installed seemed to be pointed at specific areas of the house. I even caught a glimpse of one of the contractors sneaking out of the house late one night, carrying a small bag. I was starting to piece together a disturbing puzzle. Something wasn't right in our quiet suburban neighborhood. I'm staring at the blueprint, my eyes fixed on the cryptic notation in the corner. Project ECH-12, Phase E. My father's crew has been working on our house for years, but this is the first time I've seen something like this. It's dated 1985, the same year the notorious crime boss's safe houses were being built. The blueprint in my hand was the key to unlocking the truth. I stared at the notation Project ECH-12 face and felt a chill run down my spine. It was dated 1985, the same year the notorious crime boss's safe houses were being built. I remembered the strange materials my father's crew had brought in, the reinforced steel beams, the high-tech security systems, and the crates of wires and circuit boards. They'd connected those wires to the house's electrical grid, and I'd seen them arguing with one of the contractors over design changes. It all made sense now. The crew was building a safe house for the crime boss in our own backyard. I recalled the way Mark, the retired police officer next door, would chat with my dad in hushed tones. He was probably involved too, using his connections to help my father's crew get away with this massive operation. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized the extent of their deceit. My father, the man I trusted most in the world, had been lying to me for years, I thought back to all the times he'd brushed off my questions about the renovation projects, telling me it was just extra work, or that I didn't need to worry about it. The sound of my father's voice in my head was like a knife cutting through my memories. Don't worry, sweetie, we're on a deadline. It was a lie. The deadline was for the crime boss, not the renovation. I walked into the living room where my father and his crew were packing up their tools. I couldn't help but stare at the blueprint on the coffee table, the notation, Project HH12, Facian, still haunting me. My father noticed my gaze and cleared his throat. We're just finishing up some extra work, he said, his voice tight. The police arrived soon after, taking my father and his crew into custody for their involvement in constructing a safe house for the notorious crime boss. I watched as they were led away in handcuffs, feeling a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a sense of closure. The weight of my father's deception was finally lifted off my shoulders. I realized that I had been living in a lie, that our quiet suburban neighborhood was not what it seemed. But as I looked around at the familiar walls and furniture, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It was time to rebuild, to rediscover what was real and true. It's been 2 weeks since the police took my father and his crew away, and I have to say, our little story got a lot of attention here on Reddit. I've been reading through the comments, and I'm still trying to process everything myself. The police just told me that my father will be facing charges for his involvement in constructing safe houses for the notorious crime boss. My mom is actually going to have to testify against him at his trial, which is set for next month. As for me, I decided to leave my job at the family business and take a break from it all. I'm trying to focus on rebuilding our home, both physically and emotionally. It's funny how you can feel so lost in a place that's supposed to be safe. But now that it's all coming to light, I'm starting to realize what's truly real in my life. I work as a marketing specialist at Omicron Innovations, a mid-sized tech firm in downtown San Jose. My husband Alex and I have a small townhouse in Willow Glen, where we keep our 2015 Honda Civic Hybrid parked on the street. We bought it from the original owner, a young professional who had it serviced regularly at our local mechanic's shop, Tony's Auto Repair. Last Thursday, I received an anonymous email from someone claiming to have evidence of embezzlement and money launder within our company's finance department. The message was brief, just a few sentences, but it mentioned a specific transaction that I hadn't seen before. It was from 6 months ago, and it involved a large sum of cash being wired to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read those words, and my mind immediately jumped to the worst possible scenarios. I should have known better than to open that email at home, where my husband was watching TV in the living room. I was browsing through my email inbox on my work laptop, taking a short break from drafting a marketing campaign for our new product line, when I noticed an email from our company's finance department. The subject line reads, Expense Report Q4 2022, and was dated last Friday at 9:47 a.m. I had worked on the team that reviewed expense reports, but I couldn't recall seeing this particular email before. I clicked on it to open, and as I scanned the attachment, I noticed a discrepancy in one of the line items. The amount listed for a consulting fee was significantly higher than usual, and the payment method was flagged as a wire transfer rather than our standard credit card payment. The company logo on the email's header seemed off too. It was a slightly different font style than what we normally use. I felt a spark of curiosity and made a mental note to review the company's finance reports more closely that evening. I started reviewing the company's financial reports more closely that evening, focusing on the discrepancies in the expense reports. I made a list of all the transactions that seemed suspicious and noted their dates and amounts. The first thing I noticed was a series of large wire transfers to shell companies in the Cayman Islands, all listed under consulting fees. I had worked with our finance team to review these reports before, but I couldn't recall seeing these specific transactions. I made a note to ask them about it the next day. The next morning, I attended a meeting with the finance team to discuss the reports. Our team lead, Rachel, seemed nervous and fidgety throughout the meeting. She kept glancing at her notes and avoiding eye contact. When I brought up the suspicious transactions, she brushed it off, saying it was just a mistake and that we should focus on more pressing issues. I sensed that she was hiding something, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I decided to dig deeper and started looking into our company's relationships with the shell companies involved in the wire transfers. I found that Omicron Innovations had a significant stake in one of the companies, and our CEO, Mark, was listed as a director on its board. I couldn't believe what I was seeing was our own CEO involved in embezzlement. I started keeping a record of all my findings, documenting every suspicious transaction and noting the dates and amounts. I also began to notice some strange behavior from some of my coworkers. They would often receive calls or messages during meetings, and when I asked them about it, they would brush it off or change the subject. One of my colleagues, Alex, a close friend of my husband's, seemed particularly nervous and on edge. He would often disappear for long stretches, saying he needed to take a phone call or meet with someone. I started to suspect that he might be involved in the embezzlement scheme, but I couldn't quite prove it. I decided to investigate further and started making some discreet phone calls to former employees who had left the company under suspicious circumstances. As I scrolled through the company's financial records, I stumbled upon a transaction that made my blood run cold: a wire transfer from our Cayman Islands shell company to a personal account under my husband's name, Reese, dated the same day he said he was working late at Tony's Auto Repair. I scrolled back to the email from my former business partner, trying to understand why he would confess to being involved in our company's embezzlement scheme. I had been so caught up in reviewing the financial reports and interviewing coworkers that I hadn't taken a close look at his original message. It was dated 6 months ago, when we were working on the same project together. He mentioned a specific transaction involving a large sum of cash being wired to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, and I remembered feeling uneasy about it at the time. But I also recalled a conversation with him about a consulting fee that he had claimed was for a third-party vendor. I checked our company's records again, and sure enough, there was a payment listed under consulting fees to the same shell company in the Cayman Islands. The amount was significantly higher than usual, and the payment method was flagged as a wire transfer rather than our standard credit card payment. It clicked into place. My former business partner had been embezzling money from our company, and I had unknowingly facilitated it by sending him a payment. The photo of us both on the project's kick-off meeting came flooding back, and I remembered how he had seemed so genuine and enthusiastic about the project. But now I saw his smile for what it was: a ruse to cover up his own involvement in the embezzlement scheme. My mind reeled as I realized that he had been using me all along, manipulating our business relationship to further his own interests. I sat down with my former business partner, now a whistleblower, at a small cafe in downtown San Jose. We sipped our coffee and reviewed the evidence he had gathered, documenting the embezzlement scheme he had orchestrated with our company's CEO, Mark. I felt a sense of closure as I saw the trail of deceit and corruption unravel before my eyes. The police investigation that followed led to charges of embezzlement and conspiracy against both my former business partner and Mark. The court case was a long and grueling process, but in the end, justice was served. My husband's name was cleared, and I was finally able to put this nightmare behind me. As I looked out the cafe window, I noticed a bright yellow 2015 Honda Civic Hybrid driving by, reminding me of the car we had bought from its original owner, a young professional who had unknowingly been part of our company's dealings with the shell company in the Cayman Islands. It was a small reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a glimmer of hope and renewal. 2 weeks later, I've been overwhelmed by the outpouring of support and messages from friends, family, and even complete strangers who've been following this story. One development that's particularly notable is that the judge handling my husband's case has set a trial date for next month, and our lawyer is optimistic about the outcome. On a more personal note, I finally had the courage to clear out the storage unit where my former business partner and I used to meet to discuss our projects. It was a painful task, but it feels liberating to have that chapter of my life behind me. As I look back on everything that's happened, I'm reminded that justice may be slow, but it's not always cold, and sometimes it's a small, quiet voice in the darkness that gives us the strength to keep moving forward. I'm Emily, a 28-year-old marketing specialist living in the suburbs with my husband Ryan. We just moved into a beautiful 2-story colonial on Elm Street with a detached 3-car garage that's still got that fresh paint smell. It's a 2007 model, a white Ford F-150 with a V8 engine. Ryan's been bragging about its towing capacity ever since we got it. We've only lived here for 3 weeks, and I'm still getting used to the quiet neighborhood feel. Ryan works from home as an IT consultant, so he's usually the one who answers the door. The other day, while I was out running errands at Target, yes, I still shop there for bulk toilet paper, so I saw him chatting with a familiar face, his former roommate, Alex, who moved out last year. What struck me as odd was that Ryan seemed genuinely uncomfortable around him. He ushered Alex into the garage, saying something about needing to talk to him about the paint job. I didn't think much of it at the time, but the way Ryan glanced at me almost apologetically has been nagging at me ever since. And now that I'm thinking back on it, I was going through the mail on Wednesday afternoon around 30:45 p.m. while sipping on a Starbucks latte I had picked up from the drive-thru at 30:20 p.m. when I noticed a strange delivery confirmation slip from UPS. The tracking number and the address label seemed to match our new home's address, but the name on the package was Alex, the guy who used to live with Ryan in the garage apartment. I wondered why he would send something to us, and what it could be. It wasn't until I saw the return address on the slip that my heart started racing. It was from the local FedEx office on Main Street, just a mile away from our house. I remembered seeing Alex there last week, talking to the clerk at the counter. Ryan had mentioned that he was thinking of getting some new equipment for his IT consulting business, but this seemed like an odd way to order it. I tucked the slip into my wallet and mentally added, "Talk to Ryan about this," to my to-do list. But as I continued sorting through the mail, I started to feel a growing sense of unease. I started keeping a list of every time Ryan's former roommate, Alex, would show up at our house. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as the days went by, I noticed a pattern. Every time Alex came over, Ryan seemed uneasy and would usher him into the garage. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but the look on Ryan's face kept haunting me. One day, while I was out running errands at Target, I saw Ryan arguing with Alex in the driveway. They were both standing by the F-150, and Alex was waving his arms wildly. Ryan got into the car and sped off, leaving Alex standing alone. I wondered what they were fighting about. As I continued to dig deeper, I started noticing strange things around the house. The garage door would be open when I knew for certain I had closed it. I found a FedEx package with no return address on our doorstep. When I tried to investigate further, Ryan would change the subject or brush me off. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I decided to do some research and looked up Alex's name in the local white pages. To my surprise, there were two addresses listed, one for his sister's house and another for a small apartment complex on the other side of town. I didn't recognize the address, so I decided to investigate further. I drove by the complex and took note of the security cameras installed on the building. It looked like they had some sort of surveillance system in place. I started keeping a close eye on Ryan's phone usage, trying to see if he was communicating with Alex in any way. One day, I saw him send a text message with a cryptic code, OCO 12, 3 p.m., Main Street. I had no idea what it meant, but it sent a chill down my spine. I decided to do some digging and looked up the local news archives for any mention of Alex or Main Street. As I scrolled through the articles, one headline caught my eye: local business owner arrested for embezzlement. The article mentioned a man named Alex who had been embezzling funds from his employer. I stepped into the garage, my eyes scanning the cluttered space. And then I saw my identical twin sister, or at least someone who looked uncannily like me, standing next to Ryan's F-150, talking to Alex with a familiarity that made my blood run cold. As I looked closer at the twin, I saw a faint scar above her left eyebrow, the same one I had gotten in high school after falling off my skateboard. But it was the way she was dressed that made my heart sink. A bright yellow sundress with white flowers, just like the one I had worn to our cousin's wedding last summer. It was a family heirloom passed down from my grandmother, and I had been too embarrassed to wear it in public, so I only broke it out for the most intimate gatherings. And then it hit me, the way Ryan had been acting, the way he would glance at me with a mixture of guilt and anxiety, was not because he was hiding something from me, but because he was trying to shield me from a painful truth. The twin, whose name I later found out was Alex's sister, had been posing as me on social media for months, using my identity to catfish her brother's wife's sister, Alex's wife's sister, who looked identical to me. Ryan had been trying to protect me from the fallout, but he also knew that eventually the truth would come out. And now, standing in our garage, surrounded by the eerie familiarity of my twin's presence, I realized that my marriage was built on a foundation of deception and lies. I took a deep breath as I watched the police take Alex away in handcuffs, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. The identical twin, whose name was Samantha, broke down in tears, pleading for them to reconsider. But it was too late. Ryan and I had already gathered evidence of their deceit, and the authorities had enough to charge Alex with harassment and stalking. Samantha, on the other hand, would likely face charges of identity theft and online harassment. As for Ryan and me, we would be filing for a restraining order against both of them, and seeking counseling to rebuild our trust in each other. I looked at Ryan, who was standing beside me, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and relief. "We'll get through this together," he said, taking my hand. And as we watched the police drive away, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, knowing that justice had been served, and that our marriage was strong enough to weather any storm. I grew up listening to my grandmother's stories about our family's history in Oakwood, a small town in the Midwest where everyone knows each other's business. She claimed our ancestors were among the founders, but after doing some research, I discovered that my great-grandfather actually worked as a spy for the government, infiltrating organizations that supported the Ku Klux Klan during their rise to power. I'm a 25-year-old librarian living in my family's old Victorian home, surrounded by antiques and mementos from the past. My husband, Alex, is a historian at the local university, and he's been helping me dig into our family's secrets. We've been married for 5 years, and I've always felt like there's something missing, like we're only scratching the surface of our family's story. Last week, I found an old trunk in the attic that had been locked away for decades, and I couldn't resist opening it. The keyhole was rusty, but it turned smoothly, and the creaky lid revealed a treasure trove of letters, photographs, and newspaper clippings. As I began to sort through them, I realized that my great-grandfather's work was more sinister than I ever imagined. I should have kept locking it. As I was sifting through the letters and photographs, I found a newspaper clipping from 1965 with a headline that made my heart skip a beat. Local KKK leader indicted on charges of conspiracy. My great-grandfather's name was mentioned in the article as a key witness. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that he must have been involved in something much deeper than I initially thought. I had always known him as a kind and gentle man, but now I was starting to see him in a different light. The clipping was tucked between the pages of a 1950s-era Sears catalog, which was strange because my grandmother used to love shopping at Sears on Saturdays. I remembered her telling me that she would often buy clothes for my parents from the catalog and have them shipped to our house. But what really caught my attention was the date stamp on the clipping, received by the FBI June 15, 1965. It was the same day my great-grandfather's birthday was recorded in the family Bible. I felt a creeping sense of unease as I wondered what else he might have been involved in. As I continued to sift through the letters and photographs in the trunk, I found a newspaper article about a local KKK meeting that took place in 1962. My great-grandfather's name was mentioned as one of the attendees. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that he must have been involved in some way with the organization. I started keeping a list of all the clues that pointed to his involvement, and the dates seemed to match up with the rise of the KKK in our town. I remembered my grandmother telling me about how my great-grandfather would often go on long trips, saying he was working for the government. But now, I suspected that he might have been using those trips to gather information or attend meetings with the KKK. I found a note in the trunk that mentioned a meeting at a local motel, and the date matched up with one of his supposed work trips. I decided to investigate further by looking into my great-grandfather's employment records. I searched online and found a website that listed employees from the 1950s and 1960s. My great-grandfather's name was listed, but when I clicked on his profile, it said inactive, with no additional information. I tried to contact the company directly, but they claimed they had no records of him. I started to feel a sense of unease as I pieced together more and more evidence of my great-grandfather's involvement with the KKK. It was clear that he had been involved in some way, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what exactly that meant. I found a letter in the trunk that mentioned a code name for a project, but it was written in a code that I couldn't decipher. I decided to visit the local historical society to see if they had any records of the KKK's activities in our town. When I arrived, I met with a historian who showed me some documents from the 1960s. One of them mentioned a local resident who was suspected of being a KKK member, but the name was blacked out. I asked the historian if he could help me uncover the identity of the person, but he said it was likely that the records had been destroyed. I left the historical society feeling frustrated and confused. But as I walked back to my car, I noticed something strange, a small piece of paper on the ground with a cryptic message scrawled on it. Meet me at the Old Oak at midnight. Come alone. I knew that this was no accident, someone had left it there for me to find. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that I might be getting close to uncovering a dark family secret. I walked into the attic, and that's when I saw a hidden safe behind my great-grandfather's old trunk, with a small note taped to the handle that read, "For Alex," in his handwriting. My husband's name, but why? I stared at the note with Alex's name on it, and my mind reeled as I processed the connection to the hidden safe behind my great-grandfather's trunk. I remembered the letters and photographs in the trunk, and how they hinted at a deeper involvement with the KKK. The dates on the documents matched up with the rise of the KKK in our town, and the code name for a project mentioned in one of the letters now seemed ominous. I recalled the cryptic message on the piece of paper, "Meet me at the Old Oak at midnight. Come alone." It was then that I realized Alex's involvement went far beyond being simply my husband. The safe's combination was etched onto the note, and I entered the numbers, hearing the satisfying click of the lock disengaging. Inside, I found a series of documents detailing Alex's work with the KKK. The dates matched up with the same period as my great-grandfather's involvement, and the documents mentioned a code name that was eerily similar to the one in the letter. My mind reeled as I pieced together the shocking truth. Alex had been keeping this secret from me for years, using our home as a front for his activities. I thought back to all the times he had made excuses to leave town, citing work or research trips. The memory of him handling the trunk in the attic, his eyes avoiding mine as I questioned him about it, now seemed suspicious. The way he would sometimes get quiet when discussing family history, avoiding certain topics altogether. It was all a facade, and I felt betrayed. The sound of my own voice was muffled, as if I was underwater. I couldn't breathe. The world around me began to distort, and I stumbled backwards, collapsing onto the attic floor. My vision narrowed to a single point, and everything went black. As I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the extent of Alex's deceit, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It was as if I had finally found the missing piece to a puzzle that had been haunting me for years. I remembered the cryptic message on the piece of paper, "Meet me at the Old Oak at midnight. Come alone." Now it made sense. Alex had been trying to keep me in the dark, to keep our family's dark secret buried. I slowly stood up, my vision clearing as I looked around the attic. I felt a sense of resolve, knowing that I would have to confront Alex about his actions. But for now, I just took a deep breath and let the weight of the truth settle in. I realized that I had been living in a state of denial, ignoring the subtle signs and hints that had been there all along. I thought back to the way Alex would sometimes get quiet when discussing family history, avoiding certain topics altogether. Date 2 weeks later. I've been blown away by the attention this post has received, over 10,000 comments and counting. I've been reading through them, and it's surreal to see how many people have related to our family's dark history. As for me, Alex and I are going to court next month to face the consequences of his actions. He's been cooperating with the authorities, which I guess is a start. My work has also been impacted. I've been put on administrative leave while they investigate further, but my manager has assured me that it's just a precautionary measure. It's funny how much can change in such a short time. I'm still trying to process everything, and some nights I find myself lying awake, replaying the conversation with Alex in my head, wondering what I missed. But for now, I'm taking things one day at a time, trying to be present in this new reality. I've been attending therapy sessions at a small clinic in downtown Oakdale for about 6 months now. My therapist, Dr. Rachel Kim, is warm and professional, but also refreshingly direct when it comes to cutting through the BS. I've been working through some pretty dark stuff since my ex-husband, former Army Captain Eric Harris, left me after serving in Afghanistan. We got married just before he shipped out, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened during his deployment. Dr. Kim says I'm making progress, but sometimes I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of what really went on. Last week, she mentioned that she's been looking into Eric's unit, and I think it's because she noticed some discrepancies in his paperwork when he separated from the military. She said something about a cloud of corruption surrounding his unit, but wouldn't elaborate. We've been going over this stuff for weeks, but I still get these nagging feelings that Dr. Kim knows more than she's letting on. I tried to ask her directly, but she just gave me one of those therapist smiles and said we'd get there eventually. She mentioned something about needing to get the right paperwork in order to investigate further. I'm not sure what that means, but it sounds like we're on the cusp of something big. Dr. Kim handed me a stack of papers with a single sheet on top, labeled "Si la suffit documenté SOLI." I raised an eyebrow as she said, "This is a declassified memo from Eric's unit, dated 2012. I scanned the document, and my eyes landed on a section highlighted in yellow. It mentioned a Project Nightshade, under the purview of their unit's intel division. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read the details. It sounded eerily similar to Eric's own stories about Operation Red Dragon. Dr. Kim noticed my reaction and leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think we're getting close to something, Rachel. This document is from 3 years before Eric even deployed." She glanced at her watch and said, "We need to get the right paperwork to verify its authenticity, but I think this could be our smoking gun." I felt a surge of adrenaline as I realized that Dr. Kim's cloud of corruption might be more than just a metaphor. The papers on the table were from Office Depot, dated last Thursday, and had a receipt number printed on the corner. I spent the next few days poring over Dr. Kim's declassified memo from Eric's unit, searching for any mention of Project Nightshade or Operation Red Dragon. I found several references to a Task Force Nova, operating under the umbrella of their intel division, but nothing that explicitly linked it to my ex-husband's stories. I started keeping a list of every detail that seemed suspicious, including a conversation with a fellow veteran who claimed to have been part of Task Force Nova, but refused to elaborate when I pressed him for more information. Dr. Kim mentioned that she had obtained some new documents from the Defense Department, but they were still being reviewed by their lawyers. I offered to help transcribe the paperwork, but she politely declined, saying it was too technical for me to handle. I noticed that the clinic's trash cans were emptied on Tuesdays and Fridays, and that the receptionist, Mrs. Jenkins, always seemed nervous when I asked her about Dr. Kim's schedule. I started paying closer attention to her body language and caught her glancing at her phone several times during our sessions. I decided to start recording our conversations, hoping to catch something incriminating. I set up a hidden camera in the clinic's waiting room, pointing it at the reception desk. I also began searching online for any mentions of Project Nightshade or Task Force Nova, but most of the results were classified or behind paywalls. I did find a Reddit thread discussing a rumored cover up within the military, but the user who started the thread had since deleted their account. I made a mental note to look into further investigating the clinic's financial records, as Dr. Kim mentioned that they were struggling to stay afloat due to a lack of funding. As I left the clinic that evening, I noticed a strange car parked outside, a black SUV with tinted windows, similar to one Eric had described as being used by their unit. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that Dr. Kim might be more involved in this investigation than I initially thought. I rewound the clinic's security footage. Frozen on the frame where Mrs. Jenkins' phone went dark. But it wasn't just her phone, the entire waiting room was in blackout, and Dr. Kim was standing in the shadows, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. As I rewound the security footage, something caught my eye. Mrs. Jenkins' phone had been hacked remotely, and the image on the screen was not just the waiting room, but also a live feed from Dr. Kim's office at home. The image shifted, revealing a folder labeled Project Nightshade on her computer desktop. My heart sank as I realized that Dr. Kim was not investigating Eric's unit, but rather covering it up. The documents she had given me were not declassified, but fabricated. The clinic's financial records showed a large transfer from an unknown account, and further digging revealed a shell company linked to Eric's former unit. The Reddit thread about the cover-up was started by Dr. Kim herself using a pseudonym. I felt a wave of nausea as I watched Dr. Kim's security footage. She had been monitoring my every move, waiting for me to piece together the truth. The SUV outside was not just a coincidence. It was a message from her handlers. I remembered the conversation with the fellow veteran, and how he refused to elaborate. He must have been one of Dr. Kim's assets, feeding her information to keep the investigation on track. I recalled the look on Mrs. Jenkins' face when I asked about Dr. Kim's schedule, and how she always seemed nervous. It was not because she was hiding something, but because she was in on it. The clinic's trash cans being emptied on Tuesdays and Fridays made sense now. They were destroying evidence of Dr. Kim's scheme. I felt a sense of betrayal and anger, but also a deep sadness. I had trusted Dr. Kim, and she had used that trust to manipulate me. I called the police first, then the Department of Veterans Affairs to report Dr. Kim's deception. They launched an investigation, and within a week, she was arrested for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to cover up military corruption. The clinic's financial records showed a trail of laundered money from Eric's former unit, and the shell company linked to them was shut down. I felt a mix of emotions as I watched Dr. Kim's bail hearing: sadness for the patients who had trusted her, anger at her betrayal, and a sense of relief that the truth was finally out. I thought back to our first sessions, when she seemed so invested in my healing process. Now it made sense. She had been using me to get closer to the truth about Eric's unit. The fellow veteran who had refused to elaborate earlier came forward as a witness, and his testimony helped secure Dr. Kim's conviction. As I looked through the clinic's empty waiting room, I felt a sense of closure. I had finally found justice for myself and for the others who had been affected by Eric's unit. The memory of Dr. Kim's smile lingered in my mind, but it was now tainted with a deep understanding of her true intentions. 2 weeks later, I've been overwhelmed by the responses and messages from fellow veterans and people who have gone through similar experiences with unscrupulous therapists. One development that stood out was when I received a phone call from the Department of Veterans Affairs informing me that Dr. Kim's conviction has triggered a thorough review of her credentials and the entire psychology program at her alma mater. The news made me think back to my own doubts about becoming a therapist, and how this experience has solidified my decision to pursue a different path in mental health support. I've been reflecting on the weight of responsibility that comes with being a voice for others, and how it's not just about seeking justice, but also about healing ourselves in the process. I've lived in Oakwood Estates for 3 years, renting a small house from my aunt and uncle. They're nice people, but a bit eccentric. My Uncle Jack is a retired mechanic who still works on cars in his garage. He's always tinkering with something, usually an old Mustang or a Honda Civic. I've seen him replace a whole engine in a single afternoon. My aunt, Karen, is a part-time librarian who loves romance novels and baking. She's made me countless batches of chocolate chip cookies since I moved in. We have dinner together every Sunday night. I like to think of our household as a big, dysfunctional family. My boyfriend, Alex, often jokes that he feels like an honorary member, especially when Jack tries to teach him how to change the oil in his own car. I've gotten used to the familiar rhythms of our little community, the way the sunlight filters through the trees on lazy afternoons, the sound of Karen's mixing balls clanging from the kitchen. It's also normal. I should have known better than to investigate the old family cemetery on the outskirts of town. I was walking home from the grocery store, past the old family cemetery on Oakwood Boulevard, when I noticed something peculiar. The security cameras at the entrance were facing inward, toward the cemetery gates, which seemed unnecessary for a place that's been locked up for decades. It wasn't just that they were pointed in, though it was that they were brand new ones from last year's model, installed by some company called Natewatch Security, with a logo featuring an owl perched on a crescent moon. I remembered seeing those cameras when I first moved in 3 years ago, but now they had bright yellow stickers with "Annual Maintenance Due" scribbled on them. As I passed the cemetery's main gate, I caught a whiff of something sweet and familiar, the exact scent of Karen's homemade baking powder biscuits wafting from the kitchen window of her sister's house, which just so happened to be directly adjacent to the cemetery's west side. It was an odd coincidence, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that someone had been watching me as I walked by. I started walking home from the grocery store, past the old family cemetery on Oakwood Boulevard, when I noticed something peculiar. The security cameras at the entrance were facing inward, toward the cemetery gates, which seemed unnecessary for a place that's been locked up for decades. I remembered seeing those cameras when I first moved in 3 years ago, but now they had bright yellow stickers with "Annual Maintenance Due" scribbled on them. As I passed the cemetery's main gate, I caught a whiff of something sweet and familiar, the exact scent of Karen's homemade baking powder biscuits wafting from the kitchen window of her sister's house, which just so happened to be directly adjacent to the cemetery's west side. It was an odd coincidence, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that someone had been watching me as I walked by. I decided to do some digging. First, I checked the city's website for any records of cemetery maintenance contracts. The only company listed was Nightwatch Security, which seemed to be a local outfit with an unusual logo featuring an owl perched on a crescent moon. I made a note to look into their reputation later. Next, I paid a visit to the Oakwood Public Library, where my Aunt Karen worked part-time. She was behind the circulation desk when I arrived, typing away on her computer. I asked her about the cemetery cameras and the Nightwatch Security logo. She hesitated for a moment before telling me that the company had installed the cameras last year as a safety measure to prevent vandalism. I thanked her and continued browsing the shelves, but something didn't sit right with me. As I was browsing through a shelf of old genealogy books, I stumbled upon a newspaper article from 20 years ago about a similar incident involving unmarked graves and unusual headstones in the same cemetery. The story had been buried deep in the archives, but it mentioned a group called the Oakwood Historical Preservation Society that had been vocal about uncovering the truth. I tucked the article into my pocket and made a mental note to look for more information about this group. As I left the library, I noticed a small flyer on the community board announcing an upcoming town hall meeting about the cemetery's maintenance. I decided to attend, hoping to get more answers. As I walked home, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I quickened my pace, my heart beating slightly faster. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one behind me. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the feeling lingered. As I reached the top of the hill, the headstones grew more frequent, and I stumbled upon one with a familiar name: Karen's sister, Emily, who died at 25. But it was the inscription that made my blood run cold: beloved friend, and below it, in smaller letters, forever brother. As I stood before the headstone with Emily's name, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The inscription, beloved friend and forever brother, seemed to stare back at me, mocking my earlier assumption that the cameras were simply a safety measure. I remembered the article I had found in the library about the Oakwood Historical Preservation Society and how they had been vocal about uncovering the truth behind the cemetery's unmarked graves. I recalled the strange scent of baking powder biscuits wafting from the kitchen window of Karen's sister's house, adjacent to the cemetery's west side. It was then that I realized the connection between the cameras, the headstones, and my aunt's family. The cameras weren't just for safety, they were to keep watch over the unmarked graves. The Oakwood Historical Preservation Society had been trying to uncover the truth, but my aunt's family had been working against them. They had been using their influence in the community to silence anyone who questioned the cemetery's history. The unusual headstones were not just sentimental tributes, they were part of a cover-up. I thought back to the town hall meeting I had attended, where the mayor had mentioned the importance of maintaining the cemetery's historical integrity. But what he didn't say was that some families would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. The beloved friend and forever brother inscriptions were more than just platitudes. They were a warning to anyone who dared to dig deeper. As I stood there, the weight of my aunt's deception settled heavy on me. I remembered the Sunday dinner gatherings, the laughter, and the kindness. It was all a facade, a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep me from uncovering the truth. I felt a sense of betrayal, not just for being kept in the dark, but for being used as a pawn in their game of secrets and lies. I walked into the town hall meeting, determined to expose the truth about the cemetery's unmarked graves and the Nightwatch security cameras. The mayor, my Aunt Karen's friend, was speaking about the importance of preserving the cemetery's historical integrity. I stood up and shared my findings, revealing the inscriptions on the headstones and the suspicious activity surrounding the cemetery. The room fell silent as the truth sank in. The mayor's face turned pale, and he stuttered an apology for not being aware of the situation. The police chief stepped forward, announcing that my Aunt Karen and her family had been charged with obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. They would be held accountable for their actions. As I left the meeting, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The truth had finally come to light, and justice was being served. I thought back to the Sunday dinner gatherings and the warm smiles of my aunt's family. It was all a facade, but now I could see it clearly. I walked out into the bright sunlight, feeling more aware and at peace, knowing that the truth would never be buried again. The last thing I remember is the sound of my own footsteps on the pavement, steady and strong as I moved forward into a brighter future. I've been living in a small town in the Midwest, working as a waitress at the local Denny's. My husband, Alex, and I got married last year, and we thought we had finally found our dream home, a cozy little ranch house with a big backyard. We bought it for a steal, thanks to the previous owner, a sweet old lady who was struggling to keep up with the mortgage payments. She sold it to us for a song, or so we thought. It turned out that she had hidden some major financial problems, and I ended up losing my inheritance when she defaulted on the loan. The worst part is, if the house itself was worth so much more than what we paid for it, we're talking 20 years of equity, gone in an instant. The family we hired to replace our old staff, our new landscaper, housekeepers, and handyman, have been telling us that they think there's a chance we can sue the previous owner for misrepresentation. I'm not holding my breath, but it's something. We've already had some success with small claims court, and the lawyers are optimistic. I just wish I could get over the feeling of betrayal, like someone had pulled the wool over our eyes and we were just too trusting to see it coming. I was going over the landscaper's invoice for the week when I noticed something off. The payment had been made to the family's business account, not directly to me or my husband. I called the accountant to ask about it, and she said it was a routine transaction. But something about the date caught my eye. The payment had been made on the same day our new housekeeper, Maria, started working for us. I remembered her mentioning that her husband, Carlos, was starting his own handyman business and how they were both eager to support each other's ventures. I had given them a check for $500 as a down payment on the housekeeping services. But now I wondered if it was more than just a coincidence that their business account was receiving the landscaper's payment. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee and staring at the invoice from our new landscaper, Maria's husband Carlos' handyman business. The payment had been made to their business account, not directly to me or my husband Alex, which seemed strange. I called the accountant to ask about it, and she said it was a routine transaction. But something about the date caught my eye. The payment had been made on the same day Maria started working for us. I started keeping a list of all the suspicious transactions and activities in my notebook. I jotted down the landscaper's phone number, which I had seen on their invoice. I remembered Maria mentioning that her husband Carlos was starting his own handyman business, and how they were both eager to support each other's ventures. I wondered if it was more than just a coincidence that their business account was receiving the landscaper's payment. I decided to dig deeper and started making some public records searches online. I looked up the previous owner of our house, Mrs. Jenkins, and found out that she had indeed filed for bankruptcy a year ago. I also discovered that Maria's husband Carlos had a similar business listed in the same building as Mrs. Jenkins' old lawyer's office. I started to feel a knot in my stomach as I pieced together the evidence. It seemed like there was more to the story than just a simple mistake. I remembered Alex telling me that he had talked to Mrs. Jenkins' lawyer, and he had seemed nice and helpful. But now I wondered if he was just playing us all along. I decided to pay a visit to Maria's husband Carlos at his office, which was located in the same building as his supposed handyman business. As I walked in, I noticed that the office looked brand new, with shiny new computers and furniture. But what caught my eye was a framed photo on the wall, showing Maria and her husband standing next to Mrs. Jenkins, all smiling and happy. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that this photo must have been taken before the bankruptcy. But how did they get it? I stared at the framed photo of Maria, her husband, and Mrs. Jenkins. But what really caught my eye was the tiny handwritten note on the back, in Mrs. Jenkins' own handwriting, to Carlos, with love, Mem. As I stared at the framed photo of Maria, her husband Carlos, and Mrs. Jenkins, a chill ran down my spine. The note on the back, written in Mrs. Jenkins' own handwriting, ready, to Carlos, with love, M. Suddenly, the transaction history made sense. The payment to their business account wasn't just a coincidence, it was a money laundering scheme. Maria's husband Carlos was using his handyman business as a front to transfer money from Mrs. Jenkins' bank account, which she had drained after defaulting on her mortgage. The photo on the wall was taken during happier times, when Carlos and Maria were still working for Mrs. Jenkins. But what caught my eye was the faint smudge of lipstick on the corner of Mrs. Jenkins' mouth. It was a subtle detail, but one that made me realize that Mrs. Jenkins had been more than just a client to Maria's husband. She had been a partner in crime. I remembered Maria mentioning that her husband was starting his own business, and how they were both eager to support each other's ventures. But now I saw it for what it was, a clever ruse to cover their tracks. The new office, the shiny new computers, the photo on the wall, it was all just a facade to make it look like they were legitimate. But beneath the surface, they were running a scam, using my husband's trusting nature to their advantage. I felt a wave of anger wash over me as I realized how easily they had manipulated us. The handwritten note on the back of the photo now made sense. It was a love note, written by Mrs. Jenkins to her accomplice, Carlos. I decided to press charges against Maria's husband Carlos for his role in the money laundering scheme, and he was subsequently arrested and charged with grand theft and conspiracy. As we waited for the trial, our lawyer worked with us to untangle the complex web of deceit that had ensnared us. I remembered the handwritten note on the back of the photo, to Carlos, with love, Mem, and how it had revealed the depth of their partnerships. The trial was a long and grueling process, but in the end, justice was served. Maria's husband Carlos was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. I felt a sense of closure as I watched him being led away in handcuffs, knowing that he would have plenty of time to reflect on his actions. Our lawyer helped us to recover some of the losses we had incurred, and we were able to move forward with our lives, more cautious but also wiser. As I looked out at the bright sunlight streaming into our kitchen, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, knowing that we had weathered the storm and emerged stronger on the other side. I've had a few weeks to reflect on the aftermath of Carlos's sentencing, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. The post got a lot of attention and comments, and I want to thank everyone who reached out with support and words of encouragement. As it turns out, the family we hired as replacements for our old staff is now suing Maria's husband Carlos for his role in their own financial downfall. It seems he was using their company's assets to fund some of his own schemes. Our lawyer is helping us navigate this new development, and we're working to untangle the complex web of deceit that has followed us out of this ordeal. Now that I'm finally free from the stress of this whole thing, I've started taking up painting as a hobby. It's amazing how therapeutic it is to get my hands messy and create something beautiful after all the ugliness we went through.